There is a region near the moon's south pole that sunlight never reaches. Not for a season, not for a century. For spans of time, so long they barely fit inside human history. Inside those shadowed craters, temperatures plunge so low that anything volatile can remain locked in place for ages. Ice, dust, a record of the early solar system, and now possibly the foundation of the next era of power. For most people, the moon still belongs to the past. It lives in black and white footage, bootprints, flags, and the mythology of a race that seemed to end before many of us were born. We were taught to see it as finished ground, a place already visited, already understood, already left behind. That assumption is starting to collapse. Because while much of the world treated the moon like a museum, China treated it like unfinished business. Quietly, methodically, and over decades it built a lunar program with a rhythm that now looks less like exploration for its own sake and more like preparation. First came orbital mapping, then landings, then rovers, then sample return. Each step looked technical in isolation. Together, they form something much larger, a sequence. And sequences matter. They tell you whether a nation is experimenting or building toward an outcome. What makes this story unsettling is not simply that China has become good at reaching the moon. It is where it is going, what it keeps targeting, and what that destination could unlock. The South Pole is not just scientifically interesting. It may hold the resources that change the economics of space itself. Water can become air. Water can become fuel. Local materials can become shielding roads, landing pads, maybe even structures. On Earth, those are engineering problems. On the moon, they become questions of access, timing, and control. That is why this is no longer just a story about rockets and robotics. It is a story about infrastructure, about who arrives first at the most valuable terrain, about who learns to live off another world instead of merely visiting it. And once you frame it that way, the moon stops looking like a distant object in the night sky. It starts to look like strategic ground. The most important shift has already happened. The goal is no longer to touch the lunar surface and come home. The goal is to stay useful there, to build systems that can survive there, to turn one of the harshest places imaginable into a working outpost. And if that is the real mission, then the question is no longer whether China is going back to the moon. It is what exactly it intends to leave behind. The danger is easy to miss because it does not look dramatic at first. No explosions, no triumphant speeches, just machines landing farther from Earth, surviving longer, and doing harder things in places other countries avoided. That matters because the moon is not one place. It is a world of extremes. The side facing Earth is familiar, constantly observed, and relatively easy to communicate with. The far side is different. Once a spacecraft drops behind the moon, direct contact with Earth disappears. Commands cannot simply be sent down in real time. Telemetry cannot flow back without help. Every landing there demands an extra layer of orbital planning, relay systems, and trust in automation. China solved that problem before attempting one of the most difficult lunar landings in history, not with a symbolic stunt, but with architecture. Put the communications bridge in place first, then go where others had not gone. That sequence revealed something important about the program behind it. This was not a collection of isolated missions. It was systems thinking. And that same pattern keeps appearing. Each mission has done more than prove competence. It has reduced uncertainty. Better maps, narrow landing risks. Surface operations improve mobility and thermal survival. Sample return missions refine recovery, ascent rendezvous, and re-entry. These are not just scientific achievements. They are rehearsal under real conditions. Then, there is the deeper problem beneath all of it. The moon we thought we understood was built from a surprisingly narrow set of observations. For decades, much of lunar science was shaped by samples gathered from a small number of landing sites. Valuable samples, historic samples, but still limited. New missions have started to reveal a moon that is less uniform, less simple, and far more useful than older assumptions allowed. Different terrains preserve different histories. Different regions may contain different concentrations of resources. The map was never complete. It only looked complete because few nations kept updating it. That is where the human side enters the story. Space programs are often described in hardware terms, but behind every mission is a political choice about patience. Democracies change priorities. Budgets swing. Programs stall. Deadlines slip. Entire strategies are rewritten every few years. China has operated differently. Its lunar effort has moved with a long horizon and a narrow focus, which is exactly the kind of discipline that matters when the objective is not a headline, but a permanent foothold. And a foothold on the moon is not valuable because of prestige alone. It is valuable because some locations may become gateways. If certain polar ridges offer long periods of sunlight, they offer power. If nearby craters hold accessible ice, they offer life support and propellant. If both are close together, then one landing zone can become something much bigger than a research site. It can become a supply node. And once that possibility enters the picture, every mission stops looking like exploration. It starts looking like positioning. Then the story widens. Because this is not only about reaching the moon, it is about changing what the moon is for. For half a century, every lunar mission carried the same basic logic. Launch everything from Earth. Bring every tool, every battery, every panel, every kilogram of survival with you. Land, operate briefly, then leave. It was exploration by supply chain. Brilliant, expensive, and fundamentally temporary. The next phase breaks that logic. If ice can be harvested in meaningful quantities near the lunar South Pole, the moon stops being a destination and starts becoming a source. That one change redraws the scale of everything that follows. A place once treated as barren suddenly becomes a reservoir. Not a comfortable world, not an easy world, but a usable one. And this is where China's plans become visually extraordinary. The missions now being assembled are not just about collecting data from orbit or scooping up more soil. They are aimed at the hardest terrain on the moon rims, blasted by ancient impacts, ridges lit at low angles by the sun, and crater interiors so cold and dark they behave like vaults. This is terrain where conventional exploration starts to fail. Solar power weakens, batteries suffer, shadows become permanent environments. The machines sent there cannot just drive and transmit. They have to endure isolation, darkness, thermal violence, and extreme navigation uncertainty. That challenge is exactly what makes the program so revealing. Because the proposed tools are no longer designed for brief scientific visits. They are designed to interrogate the environment, as future builders would. Where is the stable ground? Where is the light? Where is the ice? How deep is it? How patchy is it? Can it be extracted? Can local dust be turned into construction material? Can oxygen be pulled from the soil? Can parts be manufactured on-site? Those are not the first questions of explorers. They are the first questions of settlers, engineers, and planners. And once you see that the moon transforms in your mind, the gray emptiness becomes zone terrain. Some areas become power stations. Some become mines. Some become shielded shelters. Some become transit points for machines, and eventually people. What looked like scattered missions begins to resemble the survey phase of a very early industrial frontier. That is the deeper reveal hidden inside the technical milestones. Every rover track, every relay satellite, every core sample, every landing test is doing two jobs at once. One is scientific, the other is strategic. It is teaching a nation how to operate continuously in a place where continuous operation was once unimaginable. And this is why the rest of the world is paying closer attention now. Because the first country that learns to turn the moon's environment into infrastructure will not just make history there. It will change the balance of what becomes possible everywhere beyond it. The turning point comes when exploration stops being reversible. A probe can fail. A rover can go silent. A sample mission can return a few grams of rock and still remain in the grand scheme a test. But the moment a nation begins designing a chain of operations that can support itself, the meaning changes. It is no longer asking whether the moon can be reached. It is asking how soon it can become operational. That is where China's program now appears to be heading. The near-term missions point toward a threshold, confirm usable ice test construction methods, demonstrate local resource processing, and prepare the transport system for human crews. None of those steps alone changes history. Together, they create something much more serious, a path to permanence. And permanence has consequences, because the lunar South Pole is not an open plain with infinite room for everyone. The most useful sites are scarce. A handful of elevated ridges appear to receive long stretches of sunlight, making them ideal for sustained power generation. Nearby, shadowed craters may preserve ice in concentrations worth extracting. In an environment where energy, temperature, and distance decide everything, the best positions are not interchangeable. They are strategic terrain. That means the first durable installations will matter disproportionately. The first landing pads, the first power arrays, the first communications relays, the first systems capable of extracting water or producing oxygen. Once those are in place, they do more than support science. They create a practical zone of influence. Not through a flag or a declaration, but through function, through presence, through the simple force of already being there. This is where the tension becomes geopolitical. Space law was written for an earlier era when activity beyond Earth was sparse and mostly symbolic. It forbids national ownership of celestial bodies, but it does not cleanly resolve what happens when resources are extracted, infrastructure is installed, and one actor occupies the most useful terrain before rivals arrive. In theory, the moon belongs to no one. In practice, access may be shaped by whoever builds, first operates first, and stays first. And that is why delays on one side become opportunity on the other. If human missions, cargo systems, surface power, and automated construction begin to align within the same decade, then the point of no return may arrive quietly. No single launch will announce it. No single photograph will make it obvious. The shift will happen through accumulation. One mission securing data, another testing extraction, another delivering hardware, another proving transport. Then, suddenly the question is no longer whether a permanent lunar foothold is possible. It is whether anyone else can catch up before that foothold hardens into the first real infrastructure beyond Earth. So, what is China building on the moon? Not a monument, not a stunt, not a lonely outpost meant to be photographed, admired, and abandoned. What is taking shape is far more consequential than that. A working foothold. A system that can eventually land, survive, extract, manufacture, and expand. In the language of exploration, it sounds technical. In the language of history, it sounds familiar. First the surveys, then the routes, then the supply chain, then the permanent presence that makes every later arrival feel late. That does not mean the outcome is already decided. Lunar missions fail, timelines slip, hardware breaks, politics shifts. Even the best plans can collapse under physics budgets or miscalculation. And yet, the direction is now unmistakable. The moon is no longer being approached as a dead world visited for prestige. It is being approached as infrastructure. That is the real ending of the old space age. For decades, space exploration was defined by spectacular arrivals, followed by long absences, a flag in the dust, a few days of science, a return to Earth. What comes next is different. The new race is not about who touches the surface first. It is about who can make the surface useful, who can turn hostile terrain into power, shelter, fuel, and continuity, who can convert presence into leverage. And if that shift sounds abstract, think about what it means in practice. A nation that can produce oxygen on the moon does not just support astronauts. It reduces dependence on Earth. A nation that can extract water does not just sustain life. It gains the raw material for fuel. A nation that can build with lunar soil does not just save launch mass. It begins solving the oldest barrier in spaceflight: the need to carry an entire world with you every time you leave home. That is why this matters, beyond China, beyond NASA, beyond 1 decade of missions. The first durable base on the moon will not just be a scientific achievement. It will be a precedent. It will influence who sets norms, who writes operating habits into reality, and who gets there second, forced to work around decisions already made. And maybe that is the most unsettling part of all. Humanity is approaching one of the biggest transitions in its history, not in a moment of unity, but in a moment of competition. The move from one world to more than one is beginning the same way. So many chapters on Earth began with scarcity ambition and a race to secure the most valuable ground before everyone else understands what it is worth. The moon still looks silent from down here, but it is not silent anymore. It is becoming occupied, and the people who shape that change may end up shaping everything that comes after.